Manager laughed at zero balance, but was shocked to discover hidden millions. You won't believe this. Emily stood in the cramped office of the dealership, the acrid smell of burnt coffee filling the air. She could hear her manager's laughter pierce through her anxious silence, a cruel echo in her mind that surged with humiliation. $0 in your account, Emily? You should think about a different career. Maybe selling corn at the state fair. His voice dripped with condescension, and each chuckle chipped away at her spirit. A lifetime of hard work felt as though it had led her to this moment of complete failure. The mocking laughter faded into the background, overshadowed by the persistent reminder of her financial struggles. Bills piled up on the kitchen table at home, threatening to choke her hopes. How was she supposed to put food on the table for her 2 kids when her income barely covered gas to get to work? Each day was a relentless battle between duty and despair, and today, she felt right at the edge. Emily's thoughts raced. Could she really make this job work? Did she still have it in her? Before she had time to ponder, she reminded herself that giving up was not an option. As a single mother, her children depended on her resilience. Yet, she could feel fear creeping in, clawing at her resolve. What if this was it? What if she never rose above this job? The weight of hopelessness began to settle in her chest, sending her heart into spasms of panic. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now, let's continue. Distraction from her manager's taunts was nearly impossible. Every decision felt heavy with consequence. If only she could assemble the shards of her life into something solid and unbreakable, something to counter the suffocating grip of failure. But what did it matter? Days would pass by with no reprieve. The dream of owning a car dealership seemed distant. The struggle loomed larger as she collected her thoughts. An unexpected spark flickered within her. Perhaps the attic of her late grandmother's house held answers. The thought of searching through old boxes, dust swirling in airborne sunlight, ignited something deep within, a mix of nostalgia and hope. It felt like a lifeline. Yet simultaneously, it battled against the weight of reality. Decades of loss and hardship whispered doubts into her ear. When she finally climbed the creaky stairs to the attic, the air thick with the scent of cedar, Emily felt a nervous flush. What if she found nothing but memories? What if the effort was futile? As her fingers brushed against boxes that had been neglected for years, the world outside faded away. Hours slipped by, and she discovered the vault, rusty yet compelling. Inside, she found documents, old letters, family tree charts, and assets untethered from time. Unbelievable possibilities unfolded in her mind, but with it came an overwhelming dread. This unexpected legacy could alter everything or destroy the fragile foundations she'd built in a moment. As her manager's laughter echoed again in her head, she felt the swelling tide of anxiety. In this chaotic storm of emotions, Emily faced the ultimate dilemma: chase her family's forgotten wealth or cling to the safety of her current life, never knowing what could have been. And just as the decision loomed, the silence of the attic thickened, leaving her caught between 2 worlds, one that held her past and one that beckoned her future. Emily sat cross-legged on the attic floor, surrounded by cardboard boxes overstuffed with memories. The chill in the air contrasted sharply against the heat rising in her chest. She felt alive, yet terrified. Old photographs whispered stories of a family who, despite their struggles, once thrived. But now, as she leafed through the contents of each box, the exhilarating thrill was marred by one urgent question. Was it time to confront her future? A sheet of paper caught her eye, fluttering in the faint breeze. As she straightened the letter, the elegant script stirred her curiosity. It was a note from her grandmother, filled with words of wisdom and stories of perseverance. Each line resonated with the struggles of everyday life, echoing back to a time when sacrifice meant everything. Emily's heart pounded as she recalled the struggles faced by her family, the long hours, the relentless drive to give her children a better life. She paused, suddenly overwhelmed by the realization that her grandmother had forged a path against all odds. That path laid hidden, just like the documents sprawled across the attic floor. A flicker of determination ignited within her. Maybe this legacy wasn't just about old letters and distant relatives. It was about rediscovering the courage and tenacity that had defined her lineage. Emily swept through the scattered papers, absorbing every detail with newfound purpose. There it was, a handwritten ledger detailing properties and investments once owned by her family. The dust motes danced in the sunlight as she flipped through the pages, accompanied by a gradual sense that life could change. If this legacy held any value, then she could use it to pave a new path for her and her children. Her thoughts jostled in a chaotic flurry, calculations running through her mind. The cars, the dealership she once aspired to, wasn't this her chance? A flicker of ambition surged within her. All her fears transformed into motivation. Emily wasn't just an employee at a dealership anymore. She could become a businesswoman, a pioneer pursuing her birthright. She climbed down from the attic, mind racing with possibilities. Leave the toxic environment? Embrace uncertainty? There was still fear slithering in. What if it didn't work out? But the thought of remaining stagnant, chained to that dealer's desk in perpetual servitude, filled her with an urgency to act. It would require planning, strategizing, and confronting her manager, not for validation, but for her own empowerment. Days passed as she crafted a tentative plan. By day, she worked her shifts, solitude blending with drudgery. But every evening, she returned to the attic, learning about the wealth her family once possessed, each document fueling her ambition. Yet, every conversation with her manager continued laced with condescension, as if he sensed her growing resolve. Each slight felt like a reminder of how far she could fall if she didn't step up. Now, one fateful afternoon, the door swung open, and her manager sauntered in. With a bounce in his step and a condescending grin on his face, he delivered yet another dismissive remark about her work ethic. Emily met his gaze, her heart hammering louder than ever. He would never respect her until she commanded it, and today felt like the day to start claiming her power. Crossing her arms defiantly, she drew a deep breath. It was time to face her fears head-on, to confront him about her aspirations and her family's legacy. Just as she prepared to voice the words that would change everything, a flicker of doubt tugged at her resolve. What if she stumbled? What if he laughed again? But the thought of failing her children pushed her forward. "I have something to discuss," she steeled herself to say, determination shaking off her hesitation. In that moment, the stakes became monumental. Would she seize her chance, or would she allow fear to silence her yet again? Now wasn't just about the past. It was about standing up for the future she envisioned. The moment approached. Her pulse quickened, anticipation mingling with trepidation. Would this be her awakening or her downfall? Only time would tell. Emily's voice trembled, yet she forced each word through clenched teeth. "I want to talk about my position here. About my future." The smirk on her manager's face faltered, but only slightly, as he leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a posture of dominance that she had come to resent. "Your future? You mean your future here? Emily, I think your aspirations might be reaching a bit beyond what you can achieve." "It's cute, really." She felt a rush of heat in her cheeks, embarrassment clawing at her resolve. But at that moment, she remembered her grandmother's words, the echoes of strength her lineage had gifted her. It anchored her, helping to banish doubt. "No," she said, each syllable stronger than the last. "It's not just a dream. I have ideas and plans. I want to take what I've learned about our family's investments and do something substantial. I have the potential to run a dealership, to grow a business, and to leave a legacy for my children." The words spilled out in a torrent, almost foreign to her own ears. Her manager leaned forward, eyebrows shooting up in feigned surprise, his condescension replaced momentarily with mock earnestness. "That's quite the leap, don't you think? You're not going to find anyone taking you seriously, believe me." A sudden wave of clarity washed over her, reminiscent of the light filtering through the attic's dusty windows. Here she was, pleading for respect from someone who could only see her as a lesser version of himself. It ignited something in her. This wasn't merely about him or this job, it was about reclaiming her identity. "Why not?" The challenge in her voice surprised even her. "Why not take me seriously? What gives you the right to belittle my ambitions when all I'm asking for is a chance?" His expression stiffened, and Emily could see the gears of his mind turning, uncertain as to how to respond. She pressed on. I know the dealership business from the ground up. I've been here long enough to understand the market, the inventory, and the customers. What's truly holding me back is the lack of opportunity within this environment. And there it was, a crack in his armor. For a fleeting moment, she could see the uncertainty in his eyes, the discomfort of having a subordinate challenge not just his authority, but his view of potential. You really think you can handle it all? He said, voice low, steeling himself. Emily seized the moment, heart racing but focused. I do. I'm ready to work hard, take risks, and make the tough decisions. I want to stand in the face of this toxic environment and show that I can thrive. No one should have to feel small because they're being dismissed daily. My family brought me here for a reason, and I'm not wasting that chance. With each statement, she felt the weight of her grandmother's legacy solidifying within her, transforming insecurity into defiance. His laugh wasn't the hearty, dismissive chuckle she'd expected. Rather, it sounded defensive, almost fragile. You think you can just imagine a future, and then it happens? This is a business, not a fairy tale, Emily. I don't expect it to be easy, she countered, matching his gaze with newfound confidence. But I know the value of hard work, of seizing opportunity. I want to disappear quietly. The air thickened with tension, palpable and true. Emily could feel the shift not just within her, but between them. This confrontation had become less about aspirations and more about asserting her right to them. She was no longer a subordinate worker waiting for validation. She was a contender standing her ground. The silence stretched, and in that moment, she felt empowered. Whether he understood or not, she was bound to make her mark. Among the cluttered dreams and photos in the attic, she remembered the ledger of her family's legacy and how that lineage urged her forward. But as she turned to leave, the resolve pulsing through her veins was interrupted by her manager's clipped tone. You think that's all it takes? Determination? Just remember, Emily's ambition can be a double-edged sword. A shiver traced down her spine. Did he know something she didn't? The warning tinged with challenge echoed in her mind as she stepped out the door, more questions swirling. What kind of potential was hidden in her family's past? Emily took a deep breath, knowing this was merely the beginning. She would redefine her path, one step at a time, and she had something to prove. The stakes were rising, and she was all too aware that confrontation was just the first chapter in this battle for her future. What awaited her further down this tumultuous road? The challenge of tapping into her family's legacy? Or was there an unseen threat lying in wait? Emily stepped out of the office, heart racing, adrenaline coursing through her veins like wildfire. The reality of her confrontation settled in as she leaned against the cool wall, taking deep breaths to steady her thoughts. The intensity of the exchange replayed in her mind, words echoing like distant thunder. This was not just a battle for her current job. It unfolded deeper, calling her to confront long-buried aspirations. The hallway stretched before her, a mundane labyrinth filled with the muffled sounds of co-workers tapping at keyboards and phones ringing. Yet, amidst the familiar chaos, a determined clarity came. She resented her former self, the one who shielded her dreams with layers of caution. That version, who sought approval over authenticity, was slipping into the past. With every step toward her desk, Emily strategized her next moves. The dealership wasn't merely a family legacy. It was an opportunity to carve her path in an environment where few believed in her potential. This awakening churned a mix of excitement and anxiety. She needed to equip herself, not just with the fundamental knowledge she already possessed, but with a myriad of skills required for leadership. First, she recognized the need for mentorship. Not from her dismissive manager, but from seasoned professionals within the industry, those who had successfully navigated challenges similar to hers. Catching wind of a workshop series on strategic management offered by a local business network, she decided to attend. It could provide not only invaluable knowledge, but also connections that could reshape her career trajectory. As she sat at her desk, fingers poised over the keyboard, she made a list of potential mentors. Names lined up alongside their expertise, sales strategies, marketing analysis, finance management. For each name, she envisioned tailored questions, opportunities to engage meaningfully, and insights she could apply to the dealership. However, underlying her excitement was an unshakable doubt. What if they dismissed her as trivial? What if they reflected her manager's disdain? For the first time, she acknowledged this fear head-on. Could she redefine her self-perception? Was she willing to accept that rejection was part of the growth process? There was a path through the fire, and it involved embracing these uncertainties that in her spare moments. Emily returned to the family's ledger. Each carefully inscribed number felt heavy with history and expectation. It told a tale of growth from struggles, detailing triumphs that seemed long ago forgotten. Her family's legacy was not only mediocre business dealings. It was a story of resilience that pulsed through her veins. It inspired her to consider not only what had come before, but what she could build in the future. As days turned into weeks, Emily navigated workshops and evenings spent studying. She absorbed information like a sponge, slipping into discussions fueled by passion rather than fear. Intellectually, she was evolving, but the emotional muscle needed a workout too. The lesson ingrained in her grandmother's words, "Courage is fear, told to sit down and be quiet," was her mantra. But deep down, as Emily rose from novice to assertive advocate, she knew that this transformation would not be without internal conflict. The stakes were rising, and with each step she took toward her future, the voice of her manager lingered, a reminder of the hurdles that awaited. The potential for conflict brewed in the shadows. Could her new confidence withstand a direct confrontation? She sensed that not everyone would embrace her evolution. As she scanned the horizon of her aspirations, a question loomed larger. Would this ambition bring her fulfillment or drive her into isolation? The moment of reckoning drew near, and with it the specter of past dynamics returning to confront her journey. Would she be able to assert her path when challenged again, or would the echoes of doubt resurface with a vengeance? She gripped the edge of her desk, knowing the next challenge wasn't just in the workplace. It was a battle against her own insecurities. When would she have to face her manager again? How prepared would she be for the mountaintop beyond the laboratory of her ambitions? Emily's evolution was just beginning, and the next confrontation loomed, an intricate puzzle she was destined to solve. Would anyone detect the hidden strength buried beneath? The workshop buzzed with energy, a cauldron of ambition bubbling just under the surface. Emily sat in the front row, eyes darting from the speaker to her notepad, eager to capture every insight that might serve her future. Today's topic, persuasive communication. As the instructor articulated principles of influence, Emily scribbled spiritedly, her previous self-consciousness gradually fading into the background. In the past, she would have shrunk in uncertainty, but today, she leaned forward, engaged. She considered potential applications for these skills at the dealership, especially in discussions with her manager, whose condescending remarks had fueled her fire. Each strategy she learned acted as fuel for her transformation, turning the smoldering ashes of doubt into a burgeoning confidence. Yet, the larger battle loomed, facing her manager head-on. His laughter in response to her ideas echoed in her mind like a sinister whisper. Emily found herself thinking obsessively about their forthcoming quarterly meeting. No longer was she merely preparing to present the numbers. She was crafting her narrative, one that repositioned her as not merely a participant, but as a leader of change. She walked home from the workshop. Rain drizzled lightly, each drop highlighting the backdrop of her thoughts, an emotional downpour that threatened to drown her optimism. What if her assertiveness was seen as audacity? What if her manager dismissed her efforts, claiming that the numbers only reflected her past failures? In that moment of vulnerability, Emily resolved to confront her fears instead of allowing them to tether her. The shadows of self-doubt had learned to lurk in the corners, but she was prepared to challenge them. Drawing on the insights she had gathered, she crafted a plan. She would not go into the meeting as a subordinate seeking approval. No, she was an emerging force in this legacy, ready to push for innovative approaches that had the potential to revitalize the business. The night before the meeting, Emily spent hours rehearsing her presentation in front of the mirror, the reflection staring back at her, transforming before her eyes. She imagined each scenario, her manager's sarcasm, the disbelief that might cross his face when she introduced her new sales strategy. Preparation anchored her, fortifying her resolve. She no longer clung to hopes of winning his respect. Instead, she sought validation from the undeniable merit of her ideas. In the quiet of the morning, she dressed with intent, donning a tailored blazer that made her feel powerful. Each button secured her newfound confidence. She felt the weightiness of expectations settle across her shoulders, but instead of feeling crushed, she viewed it as a mantle of authority. Stepping into the meeting room, adrenaline coursed through her veins, and the ambience bore down on her, heavy yet electrifying. Colleagues settled into their seats, some flipping through notes while others exchanged polite chatter. Then she saw him, her manager, leaning back with that bemused expression that had once cut her deep. As the meeting commenced, she spoke fluidly, injecting each point with the fervor she had cultivated. The room fell silent as she outlined her strategy, projecting numbers that painted a picture of potential growth that defied conventional wisdom. Slowly, she glimpsed disbelief flicker across her manager's face, as if he was processing an unexpected plot twist in a captivating story. But then, as the presentation progressed, she could feel the tension snapping like a taut wire ready to break. Would he accept this new Emily, or would the familiar condescension cut deeper than before? Each supportive nod from colleagues tasted bittersweet validation mixed with the cortisol of doubt. Finally, as she polished off, acknowledging potential concerns and inviting feedback, Emily took a breath. The climax loomed nearer, a question lingering like the hush before a storm. How would her manager respond? Would the masculine authority she had confronted turn to open skepticism, or would he be forced to reckon with the hidden strength and ambition she had cultivated? As the minutes ticked by, she felt all eyes shift toward him, the unspoken anticipation thick in the air. This was her moment, one that could redefine not only her career, but also the dynamics of her relationships within the dealership. Ultimately, the outcome of this encounter held the power to elevate her ambitions or send them crashing back down to reality. Would she finally shake off the weight of his continuous cynicism, or would his dismissal shatter her newfound resolve? The beating of her heart echoed in her ears, underscoring a singular truth. The time had come to face the depths of her transformation. The moment hung in the air, heavy with expectation. Emily met her manager's gaze directly, steadying herself as he shifted forward in his chair, a flicker of something she couldn't yet interpret crossing his features. For years, she had rehearsed this moment, but the reality felt both exhilarating and terrifying. Interesting strategy, Emily, he began, his tone feigning indulgence. However, you overlooked the potential risks involved. His words were like arrows, aimed to pierce her burgeoning confidence. She felt the instinctive urge to defend herself, but instead inhaled deeply, centering her thoughts. The principles of persuasive communication flooded back to her acknowledge objections, pivot with confidence, and assert constructive dialogue. This was her crucible. Thank you for mentioning that, she responded, her voice steadier than she felt. But I believe that what might seem like a risk can also be viewed as an opportunity. The data points to shifts we can capitalize on, and if we don't take advantage now, we could lose market share. The words flowed out of her, strong and resolute. The silence stretched, tension accumulating as her colleagues processed the exchange. She could sense their curiosity and wariness, sensing that they could hardly wait to see how this confrontation would unfold. Heads turned slightly, and she could almost feel the collective breath being held. She thought about the potential of this pivot. Could it redefine not only how her manager saw her, but also transform her role at the dealership? Market share? He echoed, the condescension creeping back into his voice. You're talking about chasing trends that are, as of now, unproven. The taunt stung, but Emily didn't flinch. She was no longer the timid employee who would shrink beneath such disparagement. No, she had come too far and prepared too diligently to allow his dismissive tone to push her off course. I understand it appears unproven, but I've spent time analyzing not just our past performance, but also competitive trends. Our analysis indicates a significant growth path. The valuation suggests we can not only recover costs swiftly, but actually exceed our past benchmarks. The tables were turning. She could feel the air thickening around her manager, the weight of his skepticism becoming almost tangible. It was this shift she had anticipated but never truly believed could become a reality. I'd even be willing to present a follow-up analysis that includes forecasts based on different market variables if you think this approach is off base, she added, challenging him, as she watched his expression morph, if only slightly. his lips pressed together, seemingly weighing his next words carefully. For the first time, the veneer of confidence that usually draped over him showed cracks. The silence felt electric, a pulse of tension dancing between them. Very well, let us see this analysis, he finally conceded, but the challenge remained in his eyes. I'm curious if the numbers will corroborate your claims. With his acceptance, Emily felt a flood of relief mixed with a newfound ambition. It wasn't a complete victory, it was a step, an acknowledgement of her ability to challenge the status quo. But the deeper victory, the metamorphosis from doubt to determination, was blooming beautifully within her as the meeting continued. Emily found herself interrupted less, and her contributions valued more. Every question she answered with poise solidified her perception among others in the room. And as her manager maintained his guarded demeanor, she realized how far she'd advanced. Yet, her heart still pounded with that lingering question. Would he truly support her as she backed her insights with data? When the meeting concluded and the colleague chatter broke the tension, Emily felt a sense of anticipation in the air, a mix of unease and exhilaration. What if the real confrontation awaited her just outside the boardroom? What if her manager's condescension resurfaced in a more covert challenge? She had struck a blow, but the battle was far from over. Each step forward felt like an act of rebellion against the long-held norms that had once kept her silent. As she gathered her notes, her heart raced at the spectrum of possibilities ahead. The groundwork had been laid, but the real work was just beginning, and she was determined to make her mark. Who would she need to become to secure not just roles, but respect? With her resolve solidified, she exited the room, ready to confront whatever doubts remained both from her manager and within herself. The tension nestled in her gut felt familiar, igniting a powerful query: could she rise to the occasion when the stakes climbed even higher? The air shifted as Emily stepped into the bustling office, the echoes of the meeting still clinging to her. The soft hum of conversations and the clatter of keyboards faded into background noise as she processed what had just transpired. The confrontation had been exhilarating, yet beneath the surface lay the seeds of doubt, seeking to sprout and undermine her nascent confidence. As she settled at her desk, a wave of urgency washed over her. The analysis she had promised her manager loomed large in her thoughts, a challenge that required meticulous attention to detail. She opened her laptop and, without hesitation, dove into the data. Each statistic felt like an intimate conversation, telling the story of where the business stood, where it could go, and how precariously it danced on the edge of opportunity and risk. Yet every click of the keyboard brought with it a nagging fear. What if her analysis fell short? What if the numbers didn't support her claims? She pushed those thoughts aside. This was her moment to prove not only to her manager but to herself that she was more than capable. Hours slipped by, wrapped in the rhythm of calculation and hypothesis. A stark realization began to take form: this was more than just about the numbers. It was about crafting a narrative, weaving data into a compelling story that demanded attention. She needed to highlight emerging trends and illuminate the paths that competitors were blind to. But even as she strategized her presentation, a deeper, unsettling truth began to surface. She had always feared being overlooked. Emily leaned back, a mixture of exhilaration and dread coursing through her veins. She recalled the moments from her past when she felt invisible, a bystander in her own career. Imposter syndrome lingered like an old friend, reminding her of the obstacles women in her field faced. It cajoled her to reconsider. Were her ideas truly innovative, or were they simply echoes of what she had learned from others? But the flicker of rebellion ignited a determination within her. She recognized that she had a unique perspective. After all, it wasn't just about conforming to the norms. It was about creating new standards. A voice in her head urged her to dig deeper, to align her insights with authentic personal touch, her lived experiences guiding the analytical narrative. Determined, she pulled up her usual research sources, but this time she explored new platforms, seeking perspectives that challenged her preconceived notions. Hours melted into a mix of analytical prowess and creative exploration. The data morphed into actionable insights that reflected her journey and her market's uncharted territories. When Emily finally concluded her analysis, she felt a sense of pride bubbling within her. This wasn't merely an assignment. It was a representation of her growth, a a story born from the intersection of her struggles and triumphs. This was the pivot point she yearned for, the emergence of a confident voice ready to claim its place in the industry. But the thrill of completion quickly turned to apprehension as the clock reminded her that the meeting with her manager loomed ahead. She remembered his skeptical gaze, the weight of his words echoing in her mind. What if this time he dismissed her efforts outright? As she stood to gather her materials, anxiety tightened in her chest, but a deeper resolve pushed through the trepidation. She was no longer the quiet observer. She had transformed, and no matter the outcome, she was committed to standing firm in her beliefs. With a deep breath, Emily opened the meeting room door, steeling herself for this pivotal moment. The stakes were higher, her confidence revitalized, and she was ready to face whatever challenge lay ahead. As she walked in, she could almost hear a voice echoing in her mind, insisting she had come too far to turn back now. And then, as she approached her manager, the realization hit her this was her chance to redefine her image from an overlooked employee to a force of change. Little did she know, the questions swirling through her mind were about to evolve into a confrontation far more daunting than she anticipated. What would she ultimately discover about not just her work, but her identity, when faced with his next provocation? The conference room felt suffocating as Emily entered, the bright overhead lights spotlighting her acute awareness of the judgments lurking in the silence. Her manager, Thomas, sat at the end of the long table, his fingers laced and his expression neutral yet probing, like a hawk scanning the field for any sign of weakness. She could feel the weight of her presentation materials in her arms, yet they also felt like shields. A mix of exhilaration and fear coursed through her veins. "Let us get started," he said, his tone devoid of warmth. As she spread her documents before him, the palpable tension made her hands tremble. This was not merely a presentation. It was a confrontation between her past fears and the dreams she nurtured in silence. The moment she began to speak, she felt the stir of confidence battling the familiar pangs of anxiety. Each point she outlined sparked a combination of thrilling insight and an overwhelming fear of rejection. She articulated her findings, emphasizing not only the numbers but the story behind them. Yet, as she glanced at Thomas, his expression remained inscrutable, an impenetrable wall against which her hopes began to bash helplessly. "Interesting perspective, Emily," he interjected, his voice steady and surprisingly patronizing. "But how can you be sure these trends aren't just one-off distractions? We operate on hard facts, not optimistic projections." His dismissiveness felt like a blunt object to her newfound ambition, but she steeled herself against the impulse to retreat. "Because it's not only about the trends, Thomas," she countered, her voice gaining strength. "It's how we position ourselves to seize these opportunities before our competitors even see them coming. This analysis reflects shifts in consumer behavior that could dictate our market strategy for the next fiscal year." A flicker of surprise flashed across his face, but he quickly masked it. She pressed forward, propelled by a surging tide of determination she hadn't known she possessed. Every word she spoke came from a place of authenticity, drawing on her own experiences and the fears she had overcome. But just when she thought she was gaining ground, he pointed out a discrepancy in her figures. "This looks off. You're claiming potential revenue streams that don't seem to, well, add up." His eyebrow arched slightly, an all-too-familiar challenge that surged doubts back into her mind. She took a breath, slowing her racing thoughts. This was a pivotal moment. The path she chose now could determine the outcome of this meeting and possibly her trajectory in the company. Should she explain the methodology behind her projections, or could she risk revealing a personal narrative that aligned with her professional growth? "Thomas, those numbers are not just generated from data input," she said, her voice steadying. "They reflect a profound shift in how we need to communicate with our audience. It's not just about balancing figures. It's about understanding the emotional connections consumers build with brands. My approach is grounded in a vision for engagement rather than just profit margins." As she spoke, she confronted her trepidation head-on. Each statement was not just a rebuttal but a declaration of her evolving professional identity. But seeing his face, uncertainties snagged her confidence like a fishing line. "You know, sometimes people can miss the mark," she heard him say. "Maybe you're just passionate about what you believe this could mean, rather than what it truly is." Emily felt a crushing wave of frustration. It wasn't just her work he was challenging. It was her very identity. For all those years of being unheard, of fading into the background, was it happening again? No, she replied, firm yet vulnerable. I believe in my findings because they embody a truth I've lived. I refuse to allow the defense of traditional operations to sideline the innovative potential we hold. This is about more than numbers. It's about carving a path forward. The sincerity of her conviction surprised even her. Silence engulfed the room, tension simmering. In the air, Thomas's expression turned cautious. Let us see those details, he insisted, leaning forward. But as she turned the page to reveal the hidden dimensions of her analysis, a sudden realization struck her. She had ventured past the safe spot she had always occupied. No matter the outcome of this meeting, she was no longer the quiet observer in her own story. She was the protagonist, reclaiming her narrative. Before she could fully process this realization, however, a vague sense of dread loomed over her. Would her choice to be authentic strengthen her cause, or would it backfire? The clock ticked audibly, and as she turned the page, the next challenge awaited a labyrinth of unexpected revelations. What would Thomas's reaction unveil about her true standing, not just as an employee, but as a person ready to assert her place? As she braced for his response, she could feel the tide of her personal journey tipping into uncharted waters. The moment Emily unveiled her detailed projections, the air crackled with expectation. She laid bare evidence of her analysis charts highlighting shifts in consumer sentiment, case studies illustrating how similar strategic pivots had led competitors to significant market shares. She could feel her heart pounding as she witnessed the subtle changes in Thomas' demeanor. The predator-like scrutiny softened, and for the first time, his brow furrowed in genuine curiosity instead of mere skepticism. Interesting, he remarked, his tone shifting ever so slightly. You've prepared more than I anticipated. Let us consider your points regarding emotional connections. But tell me, how do you propose we implement these changes? Shift from a data-focused approach to something more intuitive? The question momentarily flummoxed her. A part of her wanted to relish the compliment, but an increased sense of urgency took hold. This meeting was no longer just about defending her numbers. It was about charting the course of her career. Strategically, she began, drawing on her instinct and training. We need to adopt an integrated approach. Empower the marketing team to leverage qualitative insights gathered from our interactions with consumers' focus groups, social media sentiment, even in-store observations. This will align our brand's presence with the emotional narratives our consumers are experiencing. She noticed him leaning in as she spoke, perhaps intrigued, perhaps questioning the feasibility of her strategy. As she showcased specific methodologies that could be employed, she felt her earlier fears dissipating. They had been replaced by clarity and an empowering sense of possibility. Each idea she presented reinforced her belief that she was no longer merely a cog in the corporate machine, but a potential architect of its future. However, Thomas's next words pierced through her optimism. And what do you think others in the company are going to say about these recommendations? Treading new ground often gets met with opposition. Some might argue that this approach is too risky. The tension coiled around her, a suffocating reminder of her past insecurities. He was right. The company had enveloped itself in a fortress of traditionalism, and any attempt to breach those walls was likely to encounter resistance. But rather than retreating from this challenge, something within her ignited. I believe change is often met with resistance, Thomas, she countered, her voice steadier this time. But without moving forward, we risk stagnation. We have to instill a culture that embraces innovation instead of fearing it. Building trust with our teams, inviting their input in this pivot, could transform resistance into rallying support. As she spoke, a sense of purpose flooded her thoughts. These were not just strategies. They were reflections of who she was becoming, a leader ready to challenge the status quo. She took a deep breath, eyeing his reaction, testing the waters. Unexpectedly, a flicker of admiration glinted in his eyes. You might just be onto something, Emily. His words gave her a fleeting thrill, but beneath it lay a fresh wave of anxiety. Was this the moment she had longed for, or merely a fleeting reprieve? The discussion shifted to logistics, timelines, potential hurdles, and actionable steps. They explored how to communicate these concepts across departments, rallying support from others whose buy-in would be crucial to the success of her recommendations. As they wrapped up the meeting, Emily felt a mixture of triumph and trepidation. Her initial presentation felt like a mere stepping stone to something larger. Everything was now about execution and influence. But would she have the support from her peers, or would her past as a quiet observer haunt her professional ascent? Replaying the conversation in her mind, she couldn't help but ponder whether this was the beginning of her growth into a leader, equipped to influence and innovate. Yet, a gnawing question lingered. Could she truly navigate the political waters of her company, or would she succumb to the fears that had held her back for so long? With resolve building within her, she stepped into the corridor, determined to begin laying the groundwork for her newfound strategy. But as she glanced at the passing faces of her colleagues, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was on the precipice of a deeper, more challenging confrontation. This was only the beginning, and everything would hinge on her next move. How would she take this momentous opportunity and translate it into a coalition capable of propelling her vision forward? The clock was ticking. With each passing day at the dealership, Emily felt the stirrings of new confidence weaving through the remnants of her past self. No longer the timid employee relegated to the sidelines, she emerged as the architect of her destiny. The pivotal meeting with her manager had ignited something profound, the awareness that she could redefine her professional narrative. As she stepped into the office one morning, the dull ache of self-doubt faded. Her heart raced with anticipation. This was not just another day, it was an opportunity to solidify her growth. Emily's commitment to implementing her strategic vision began to materialize. Conversations with colleagues transformed into collaborative discussions, and each interaction deepened her resolve to create an environment where innovation thrived. Those who had once seen her as merely an observer were now engaging with her ideas. She felt the power of perspective shifting, the whispers of skepticism fading behind a chorus of support. This wasn't merely a transformation, it was a revolution in her workplace dynamic. In the break room one day, she overheard murmurs of intrigue about her recent presentation. Colleagues who initially doubted her capabilities now sought her insights. They invited her to join project teams and collaborate on initiatives that aligned with her aspirations. It was exhilarating. The validation hung in the air like a sweet perfume. With every brainstorm session, Emily unveiled more layers of her plan, interlacing emotional intelligence with analytical rigor, an approach that resonated with her peers and leaders alike. Soon, they turned to her not just for advice, but for direction. Then came the invitation to oversee a new marketing campaign, one that embodied her vision for emotional connection with consumers. The promotion felt instinctively right, yet remnants of doubt lingered. Would she be capable of navigating greater responsibilities? But each moment she stood in this leadership role reinforced her belief she could manage multifaceted projects, inspire her team, and create measurable impact. Weeks turned into months, and as the campaign came to fruition, Emily organized a presentation for the entire staff. Riding the waves of excitement, she shared the successes derived from aligning emotional engagement with brand strategy. The positive results infused her with pride, showcasing not just her strategically crafted ideations, but the evolution of herself. She was no longer Emily the underdog. She was recognized as a leader capable of influencing corporate decisions. And yet, the ultimate test awaited her. The board was convening to discuss a significant company pivot, an initiative directly connected to her strategic insights. Emily prepared meticulously, crafting a presentation that wove together marketing metrics, financial projections, and consumer engagement stories. On the day of the board meeting, she dressed with intent in her tailored blazer, embodying the ambition she had nurtured. As she walked into the room, familiar faces greeted her, yet this time, their gazes held curiosity rather than skepticism. Standing before the board members felt like stepping onto a stage she had long yearned for. But it was her moment to lay claim to the journey she had embarked upon. Today, she began, projecting her voice with clarity. We stand at a crossroads ripe with opportunity. Our ability to respond to shifting consumer sentiments will define not only our immediate success, but also our legacy in this industry. The words flowed as she transitioned through her meticulously crafted insights. With each slide, she felt the weight of her achievements, The arduous journey she navigated echoed in her tone. As Emily wrapped up her presentation, the silence that ensued felt charged. I believe this strategic direction will not only preserve our market share, but enhance our brand's reputation. This is about taking calculated risks and fostering an environment that champions innovation. When the board members began to discuss her ideas, she felt the warmth of validation wrap around her. A board member spoke. You've done substantial groundwork, Emily. We need leaders like you who demonstrate the resilience to lead us into this new era. The subsequent vote passed unanimously. Emily felt the rush of triumph echoing through her veins, a breakthrough not just for the dealership, but a testament to her evolution. She had faced her fears head-on, skillfully maneuvering through the challenges she once thought insurmountable. But it was more than just the acknowledgement of her competence. It was the profound sense of fulfillment that came from rising through adversity. Emily walked out of that boardroom not just as a successful businesswoman, but as a renewed person no longer defined by doubt or the laughter of her past manager. Instead, she was defined by her tenacity, competence, and a legacy of her own, making that as she stepped into the office, the energy was palpable. Colleagues congratulated her, and it felt like a homecoming, one where every struggle had been worth it. Emily had transformed from the margins into a central figure, a person blazing trails rather than stumbling over obstacles. And in the silence of her heart, she whispered a promise. She would continue to build, inspire, and champion the unyielding spirit of perseverance. This is your moment to take inspired action. You need to subscribe now to the channel for more exclusive emotional stories that inspire growth and resilience. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and ensure these powerful narratives reach those who need them most. Comment below to share your reactions and theories about Emily's journey. Don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this empowering conclusion. Let's uplift each other, one story at a time.